Hello, Jules, and welcome back to the Fishbowl with Jade, where we dive beneath the surface of the conversations that challenge the way we think about ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. I'm your host, Jade, and today I want to have one of those conversations that may make us uncomfortable, but discomfort often becomes the doorway to growth. So before we dive to get deep beneath the surface, put on your scuba gear. You're going to need it for tonight's episode. Recently, I found myself watching the television series For My Man. If you've ever seen it, you know the stories can be heartbreaking. Episode after episode, I found myself asking the same question: why? Why would someone risk their freedom, their future, their family, and sometimes even another person's life for someone they loved? Why would anyone believe that committing robbery, assault, or even murder would somehow lead to a happily ever after? As I continued watching, something else caught my attention. Many of the women featured on the show weren't married to the men they were risking everything for. Many were girlfriends. Some had only been together a short time. Others were in unstable relationships that lacked commitment from the very people they were sacrificing everything to keep. That observation made me stop asking whether this was really about love. Maybe, just maybe, it was about something much deeper. Today's conversation isn't about judging the women featured on those episodes. Their actions had consequences, and accountability matters. This conversation is about understanding the emotional road that can lead someone to make decisions that cost them everything. Because if we understand the road, perhaps we can recognize the warning signs before someone else travels down it. One thing I couldn't ignore while watching these stories was how many of the women seemed desperate to be chosen. Think about that word for just a moment: chosen. We all want to be loved. We all want someone to appreciate us, value us, and make us feel important. But somewhere along the way, some people begin believing that if one particular person doesn't choose them, then they somehow have no value. Their identity becomes attached to someone else's acceptance. That's a dangerous place to build your life, because the moment another person becomes responsible for your happiness, your confidence, and your identity, you'll often begin making decisions you never imagined making just to keep them from walking away. That's when love quietly transforms into emotional dependency. You're no longer asking, is this relationship healthy? Instead, you're asking, how do I keep this person from leaving me? Those are two completely different questions, and they lead to two completely different lives. Before we go any further, I want to make something very clear. Although today's conversation was inspired by women featured on For My Man, this isn't just a women's issue. Men lose themselves in relationships too. Men ignore red flags. Men stay in unhealthy situations because they're afraid of being alone or because they believe no one else will love them. The desire to be accepted isn't male or female, it is human. Every one of us wants to matter to someone. The danger begins when another person's acceptance becomes more important than our own self-respect. When we make another person responsible for our identity, anyone, man or woman, can begin making decisions that don't reflect who they truly are. I think one of the greatest misunderstandings we have is believing that self-esteem and self-worth are the same thing. They aren't. Self-esteem is often influenced by what's happening around us. Self-worth is much deeper. Self-worth is believing you have value even when someone rejects you, even when a relationship ends, even when someone doesn't see your value. That's why two people can experience the same breakup and respond completely differently. One says, "This relationship ended." The other says, "My life is over." The relationship wasn't the difference. Their identity was. When your self-worth depends entirely on another human being, you're asking them to carry a responsibility that was never theirs to carry. As I watched these stories, another thought kept crossing my mind. There is a difference between loving someone and needing someone. Love says, I choose to share my life with you because you make my life richer. Need says, I don't know who I am without you. One is rooted in confidence. The other is rooted in fear. Healthy love is built by two people who already know who they are before they come together. Emotional dependency asks another person to become your purpose, your peace, your confidence, and your identity. No relationship was ever designed to carry that weight. The healthiest relationships are made up of two whole people choosing one another, not two broken people expecting the other to complete them. Somewhere along the way, society romanticized the phrase ride or die. Songs celebrate it, social media glorifies it. We applaud people for saying they'll stand beside someone no matter what. But I have to ask, at what point does loyalty become self destruction? Standing beside someone while they overcome hardship is admirable. Standing beside someone while they destroy your future isn't loyalty, it's surrender. Loyalty should never require you to abandon your values, your morals, your integrity, or your future. If someone truly loves you, they should never ask you to prove it by becoming someone you'll later regret. I don't believe most people wake up one morning planning to commit horrific crimes. It usually starts much smaller. You ignore the first lie. You excuse the first manipulation. You overlook the disrespect because you don't want to argue. Then you tell yourself it's only one favor, then another, then another. Before long, you've crossed boundaries you once promised yourself you'd never cross. The biggest mistakes in life are often built on the smallest compromises. Rarely do people arrive at tragedy in one giant leap. More often, they arrive there one compromised decision at a time. Manipulation doesn't always look the way we think it does. We often imagine it as yelling or threats, but sometimes it sounds much softer. If you really loved me, you're all I have. Don't leave me. Prove you're loyal. Those words can become emotional weapons when spoken to someone whose self worth already depends on keeping the relationship alive. Manipulation succeeds because it exploits our deepest fears, especially the fear of abandonment. Someone who fears being alone may ignore their own conscience just to avoid losing the relationship. One of the saddest things that can happen in a relationship is that you slowly disappear without even realizing it. You stop seeing your friends, you stop pursuing your dreams, your hobbies disappear, your goals become their goals, your happiness depends on their mood. Then one day the relationship ends and you're left asking, who am I? Healthy relationships should expand your world, not shrink it. They should encourage you to become more of yourself, not less. They should never require you to abandon your identity to preserve the relationship. I also think we have to acknowledge that not everyone grows up seeing healthy love. Some people grew up watching relationships filled with manipulation, betrayal, control, or violence. Some learned that love meant enduring pain. Others learned that jealousy meant someone cared. While those experiences never excuse criminal behavior, they can influence how people define love later in life. That's why it's so important to examine our own beliefs and ask ourselves where they came from. Sometimes healing begins when we realize that what we accepted as normal was never healthy to begin with. One thing that haunted me while watching these stories wasn't just the crime, it was everything that came afterward. Prison, children growing up without their mothers, parents visiting correctional facilities instead of celebrating birthdays, holidays missed, graduations missed, entire futures erased. And in many of those stories, the person they sacrificed everything for eventually moved on. That's heartbreaking. Not because they weren't responsible for their choices. They absolutely were, but because the very person they believed was worth losing everything for often wasn't there when everything was gone. Imagine giving away your future to someone who wasn't willing to protect it with you. I think we also need to redefine what healthy love actually looks like. Healthy love doesn't isolate you. It doesn't manipulate you. It doesn't make you prove yourself by sacrificing your integrity. Healthy love respects your boundaries. It celebrates your growth. It encourages honesty, accountability, and independence. It allows two complete people to walk beside each other instead of expecting one person to carry the emotional weight of the other. Love should make you feel safe enough to be yourself, not afraid you'll lose someone if you are. Let me say this clearly. Understanding behavior is not the same as excusing behavior. Every person is responsible for the choices they make. Victims deserve justice. Families deserve healing. My purpose today isn't to minimize the seriousness of these crimes. My purpose is to ask whether we can recognize the emotional warning signs before someone's life reaches this point. If we can help someone understand their worth before they lose themselves in someone else's approval, if we can help someone recognize manipulation before it becomes control, if we can help someone believe they are enough without another person's validation, then perhaps we've helped change a life we'll never even know about. Jules, before we come back to the surface, I want to leave you with a few questions. Have you ever ignored a red flag because you were afraid of losing someone? Have you ever accepted less than you deserved because being alone seemed more frightening than being unhappy? Have you ever changed who you were just to keep someone else's attention? Have you ever mistaken attention for love, obsession for loyalty, or fear for commitment? Sometimes the hardest person to tell the truth to is ourselves, but healing begins with honesty. I want you to remember this. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on to someone else, it's refusing to lose yourself in the process. Never confuse attention with love. Never confuse obsession with loyalty. Never confuse sacrifice with self destruction. The healthiest relationships are built by two people who already know their worth before they ever say, I love you. Love should never cost you your freedom. It should never cost you your integrity. It should never cost you your peace. And it should never cost you yourself. Thank you for sitting in the bowl with me today. If this conversation made you think, I encourage you to share it with someone you care about. You never know who may need to hear that their value isn't determined by another person's ability to see it. Sometimes one conversation is all it takes to change the direction of someone's life. Let's return to the surface and decompress. Until the next dive, stay classy, stay curious, and stay ever evolving. The Fishbowl with Jade can be streamed on Spotify, Amazon Music, Amazon Audible, Good Pods, YouTube, and iHeartRadio.